Let's see. So it's 12:07 p.m. Let's go ahead and get started. Since our meeting normally starts at 12, we have our stand-in Rotary bell. So we'll go ahead and ring it. So for our Pledge of Allegiance today, we have Phil.
Phil's muted.
Phil, can you unmute yourself?
There you go. Okay, yes, here we begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. We seem to be getting a little better at that every week. So welcome, everyone, to the online meeting of the Indianapolis East Rotary Club. We have a great speaker lined up today who will get to here shortly. We do not have Janine on this call yet today, so do we have anyone who would like to volunteer to do our invocation?
Well, Ryan, I'd be more than happy to, since I missed that last week, if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah.
Let's all pray together. Father, we thank you for this another day you've given us. Thank you for all your many blessings and your goodness to us, for your care and watch over us. Thank you for this club. Thank you for the organization to help the East Side community to meet the needs of others as we work throughout Warren Township and Indianapolis and throughout the state. Be with us and guide and direct us this day. Meet each need, Lord, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you, Phil. Do we have any club business that we need to address this morning? Any announcements that we need to address?
We just need to wrap up the grant applications for this year right away. He said that we're late on getting them in there.
Yes, and Don, I received your email. I know you have sent me those receipts somewhere, so I'll go ahead and get that taken care of. And I see the check you sent, so we can get that taken care of.
I can send you the receipts again.
If you wouldn't mind,
Ryan,
that would be appreciated. Thank you. Yes, Mark.
Ryan, I know we have a few guests and also some other Rotarians you may want to identify, but I'm taking the attendance, and there's one person on here who just says iPhone. I'm not sure who's joined with the iPhone. I've got the attendance other than that.
It might be my phone. This is Ted.
Ted, that is you, and welcome. Good hearing your voice.
Hey, good to hear you guys too. I'm so sorry I've been involved in all these lovely honey-do lists, so I haven't had a chance to be online until today. So I missed you guys.
Ted, it's great to have you today. And with that, we have our, starting July 1st, our assistant governor for our club, Jeff Lake, who is joining us. And you're with the Indianapolis Downtown Club, correct?
Yes, great. Looking forward to helping your club next year and maybe for another couple of years.
Awesome. Thank you for visiting today. We have Claudia visiting from Frankfurt, Germany. Would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your involvement as a Rotarian?
Yes, I'm Claudia from Frankfurt in Germany, and I'm a member of one of our e-clubs in Germany, which means we are from everywhere around Germany, from to the north to Bavaria and the south, and we always meet via Zoom. So you do it now, but for us it's normal business. And we are working together with the local Rotary clubs, so we can do hand-on projects as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. We also have Terry Harvey, who's with the Noblesville Midday Club and our District Deck DB expert. Terry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, sure. I'm the district administrator, as he has indicated, and also a member of Noblesville Midday. I decided in the absence of a lot of in-person club meetings.
So excited.
I would check out all the various clubs who are meeting by Zoom, and appreciate the opportunity to visit your club today.
Well, Terry, thank you for visiting with us. We do not have Jack Dan on here for our Rotary Minute. So do we have someone who would like to take a moment to talk about a way that Rotary means something to their life, or what it means for them to serve Rotary?
I've been pleased to serve Rotary for 7 years, and I appreciate what this little club has done for not only the East Side and not only Warren Township, but mainly for that, but all over the world with the involvement that we've had through the Rotary Foundation and through the international conventions and so forth that we had here in Indianapolis about 20 years ago. And so it's amazing what this little club has done for Warren Township, though. And I hope that we continue to serve them for another 30 years.
Yes, thank you, Don. And we also have a visitor who is a non-Rotarian, Catherine Basham. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Catherine Basham, and on the east side, I live on the east side, and I am a coordinator with the Sunny Day Community Center. So we're the food, toiletry, clothing pantry, or one of the food, clothing, toiletry pantries here on the east side. And then I also wear another volunteer hat, and I assist with the Council Parent Teacher Association. So we help all the local PTAs and all the Warren Township schools. So that is who I am.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. All right. We will move on to our speaker. And Julie, you have the floor to introduce today's speaker.
Julie's on mute.
There, I had to figure out how to do it on my phone.
Okay.
Well, this speaker is near and dear to my heart. He is a teacher in Franklin Township Schools, and he's my husband. And I just thought it might be interesting for you all to hear a teacher's perspective of the COVID-19 situation and what they're doing, because he did a lot to get school finished last year, and I just thought you might enjoy hearing some of the things they are working on. So, Rick, take it away.
Well, thank you, dear. We did our transition, and luckily we had online going on at the time of Canvas. So we had, I used it basically as a storehouse or a management system, but already I had students could Dropbox things in, and they could get pieces of information, both worksheets and videos going. So when we started out, it wasn't as rough of a transition as possibly for some who weren't doing e-learning types of, even have the e-learning that we could do on a snow day. And so we did e-learning for the week before spring break. And then we had a little bit of transition time, extended our spring break, and then went back into it. Still, I believe that probably teachers were all across the board on their use of that system. So there were some different learning curves going on, as there probably would be for any group of people as we did that. But during those 5 weeks after spring break till we finished out, I put on 11 labs. This is my regular physics because I have 3 different preps. I teach physics at the high school level. And so I did 11 labs where I'd go in and videotape the lab and then give them the dry lab data so that they could still process it, do graphs, and do conclusions and submit those. So we were doing those labs. It's really hard on Zoom to do any kind of a lecture. It's a talking head. And so I would videotape myself doing lectures with a whiteboard and put in some notes that way too. So I was using Word documents and PowerPoints and Zoom. We had a scheduled Zoom meeting every week with our students. The layout that Franklin Township had was we would post up all of the work that we wanted to have them to do for that week by Monday at 3. And then they would have Tuesday and do the work. And then Thursday or Friday, we already have block scheduling. So it's 2-hour blocks, and we would do Zoom meetings, not for 2 hours, but for 1 hour with each of our sections. And so that kind of locked it in pretty well. I had already had it set up so that they'd be doing the labs, a worksheet, and some book work. I have constantly been scanning in, don't tell anyone, the problems out of the book, because students get really good at using their phone and having their problems right there so they can do that, whereas they don't want to carry around their textbook. And so I just put the problems on there so that they could do that and the worksheets. So I was set up pretty well. It's very time consuming to make the videos, to be crunching that and getting that going. I'll have that for the last 9 weeks as we roll around again, but I think the startup is going to be really interesting. That's kind of some of my thoughts. Is I had my culture set. My students they knew I had syllabus, laying everything out for the semester, and I just said, hey, we're going to hold the line and try and keep things just sane in an insane world and do what we said we're going to do. And I had individual unit objectives and such that I put out too. So I set the framework, and that's what I'm trying to figure out for the future here. Two different scenarios. One is winding down like we did this last year, but another one is when we come to the fall, I'm going to have to create culture with students and people I haven't met yet directly. And so that's going to be a challenge, because we've always had them sign in and hook into Canvas themselves. And if a student has issues, we've always had the face-to-face to help them work out what it takes to get signed in. But now it's hard for me to get a hold of them, because if they aren't, we have one-to-one in our school corporation. So for us, we already have them with laptops and phones tagging into Canvas and doing that on a regular basis. I had a question of day every day on Canvas prior to all of this, but it'll be a transitional, them anchored in. The things to consider, I think, in the future that are going to be challenging, and I've been looking at the in-class, which is Indiana's look at the CDC standards, and how do we, when we get students back together and we want to do PPEs and we want to do socially distancing, it's going to be a challenge for every corporation. Getting them onto buses. I've seen that the challenge of taking a 66-person bus and knocking it down to 13 to 17 because their distancing is going to be transitional. So you're probably going to have a lot more parents who make choices either to take their child in on their own, drive them in, and or stay home possibly, if that's an option, and do online. So what I anticipate we're going to have, and I also teach an astronomy class at Ivy Tech, and they are looking at a blended, at Ivy Tech, we're going to see, they suggested we see half of our students every other lecture period and have the other half at home, and then they participate online, and then we just swap them around so that we do have some face-to-face option with them so they have a chance to communicate. This is going to make labs really, really challenging. You can probably do what I call block one, just kind of see a group for 6 hours and set out the week with them. Even when we were doing this Zoom before, I was having optional Zoom meetings on Mondays to kick off each of my sections, because I have 3 different prep classes. I have the AP1, AP2, and then regular physics. So I had a Monday check-in where anyone could come in, and it started out pretty good, and then it got less and less as we went. But they could check in, and I'd have just a Zoom meeting to talk and answer questions on top of the other ones at the end of the week. But kind of a kickoff and a finalize. Labs are probably going to have to be, it's like we're going to be flipping our classroom. The flipped classroom, they have the students watch the lecture and the in-class portion at home. And then in class, you work problems, you do the labs, you do the stuff you have to do face-to-face. And I think that's kind of the nature it's going to take on, except if we're going to do labs, we have to figure out a way to clean up all the equipment because you can't have people touching stuff and then have another group come in and touch it. So we're gonna have to have a cleaning schedule for that. CDC really looks like the plan works well for maybe elementaries where you have a classroom hosted group of people. But in high schools and middle schools where people get up out of their desks and walk around the building, I've been trying to think, how can I clean my room in a 6-minute passing period? Obviously, they're gonna have to extend some time and create some transitional protocols for that. And maybe even, and this is when I talk about block 1, you get one class, we're in a 7-period day. So I have period 1 come in on Monday, period 2 come in on Tuesday, but physics like that is going to be crazy. I mean, you need a little bit of contact every day if you can. And so we're going to have to train the students to really take the initiative on their education. It's going to be very collegiate in the way that it is if we do blocks, because that's what college does, is they have meetings every other day or 3 times a week. And so we're going to have to convince them that it's really going to be a little bit more work on their part, because they're going to have to, if you do a block schedule where you go over the week at once and then you have another group the next day, you can still do some online vids. Again, that's multitasking for a teacher, but they're going to have to really be aggressive and assertive in their education. I feel like it's going to be a real challenge for most of our medium students. The ones who are going to be successful in school are going to be successful in school. They're going to get after it and be aggressive. I had a dozen of my 36 regular physics students just kicking it all the way to the end, just really solid and hard. And others were all across the board on that. But we're going to have to really, I would reach out and email a lot more to the students going, hey, are you with me? And it's really hard to get them to feed back if they're not connected. And so connectivity is going to be a real piece that we're going to have to build up and make sure that we're not losing people through the cracks, because you get the full spectrum of students that walk in the door, that type of thing. Other things that I do, I'm a robotics coach. We do VEX robotics. And I've got that, I run almost like a scout group. I've been a scoutmaster, and so it's student-led. It's led by them. And we've been having weekly meetings. They rolled out the competition in April. But the question of how are we going to build a robot in this world when they're saying keep your extracurricular activities to a minimum and contact and that. So we've been working through a lot. We think we can definitely build the robot and get it done. How do you hold a competition where you're bringing a lot of people in different teams together? We think you could run that maybe like one of these choir competitions. Again, it would take an extra cleaning of the building, but you put them out in separate rooms by their small groups. You bring them in for their period of time, and then you send them back out. So you're just not going to have a huge spectator. It's going to have to be videoed somehow so that people can participate. But I think we could even hold one of those in a safe fashion right now if we use protocols and set it up that way. So right now we put the pits all in one big room so that you can easily contact people. We're going to have a communication network so that we can have them out in classrooms separated around, and then it's their turn and they come down and do it and then they go back and that. So it's still a ways off, but you know, even with building a robot, and we're going to build one, you know, whether we compete or not, whether they can sort out all the details, that's not what it's about. It's about the process of developing and the engineering process and building and designing and doing. So the competition is a perk and a way to work out kinks and that sort of thing. I've talked for a bit. Any questions? I'll open it up, and if you want to hear about a few other things, I can poke at those.
Yeah, I did have a question.
Yeah.
What's your school's projected opening date for the fall?
Question. I'm a teacher. I wish I knew. I can't answer that question right now.
Hopefully August.
Hopefully August. You know, what are we going to do? It looks like with this plan, this in-class plan, they're trying to get it so that you are legitimate. You're following the guidelines, whether you have blended, face-to-face, etc. I could even see, and I'm not the guy who makes these decisions, but a rolled out plan where you might meet some face-to-face people up front and do the other part and roll those at different timelines. I know that's kind of one.
Did we lose him?
Maybe.
Yes.
It sounds like we might have.
Oh, no.
Hopefully it freezes.
His clone is still online.
Yeah, the video looked like it's just frozen.
Yeah.
I wonder
Audio.
what I wonder as a teacher is this something that how do we create equity for the kids who don't have internet access? There has to be a way to be able to do that, because I know that many of my kids that were participating that didn't participate didn't because they didn't have access to the internet.
How did does anybody know, how did the free service through Verizon, AT&T, there were several different providers that were giving kids the free opportunity to have free internet? Did anybody?
Well, here's the problem, though. There may be some students' parents who are not engaged. I taught for 20 years in Greenfield and about 3 here in Warren, and I've had had problems in both places with certain kids that just don't have access. And it's not so much they may have access technically, but whether their parent insists or not, it's almost like the desire to have access to the education that's being provided is not there. So how do we manage that? I think that's a huge question that needs to be addressed.
Okay, we got he's reconnecting now. There you are.
Crazy Zoom and internet. Sorry about that.
We'll see how the pandemic gets on. My mother and father-in-law are really hoping that it's not late because their schedule going through.
Excuse me. I believe you got cut off mid-statement, so we'll just go ahead and resume where you left off.
I believe, and everybody kind of froze on my screen. I thought, uh-oh, it's me, because everybody's saying we lost him.
3 of them will be outside their community.
I think that possibly there are going to be different rollouts. You can't keep your high school students in school if they take care of their younger sibs. That's the thing. Sometimes in your household, you can't keep them there if they're the ones keeping people from being latchkey children and that sort of thing. And so it's going to have to be flexible in that respect. But I can see that you might start out your face-to-face. I think you'd want to start out your face-to-face as early as you could. Sounds crazy. But that way, if we have the second wave, which they're expecting between September and November, you could take an extended fall break. Just like regular flus and colds that happen in schools, when a school gets to be a high percentage of influenza, like 40 and 50%, they'll close it down until they can clear it out for a period of time. So you may want to build that time frame in as early as you can to get this thing moving so that you can take a break when the second wave comes, which it quite possibly will, like the 1918 that came through.
Do you have any input on, and I teach at Warren, I'm the director of the Performing Arts Center and a tech theater director. Do you have any input? Because we have quite a few students. I taught for 20 years plus in Greenfield, for 7 to 18, but anyway, where there is a lack of access. And I'm not entirely, I don't really mean the internet is not available as much as I mean there are students out there who maybe their parents aren't involved. They're young kids that, we like to think that parents are involved and insisting that their kids are online. or getting the education that they need, but not all of them do. So how do we, I guess it's a two-pronged question. One, how do we provide internet access to kids who don't have it, period, because the technology's not there? And then two, the kids who are quote unquote dropping through the cracks because they choose not to get online. Does that make sense?
I think what we're doing when we do this online is we're teaching the parents as much as we are the students, if we can get them to do it. Because I look back, and in Indiana, they didn't require much more than, well, they didn't even require up through Algebra 1 until about 1994. And that's when they started requiring Algebra 1 to graduate. And then they've added on the Algebra 2, and now it's 6 semesters post and including Algebra 1. So it's Algebra 1, Algebra 2 second year, and a geometry or some other math. And for the Core 40, it's another 2 on top of that. So the parents don't really have the algebra experience or the math experience. They can't help these students doing what they're doing. So anything we put out, we need to put out so that it's really, I'm going to have to be much, much, much more self-explanatory about what is going on here and give examples. In the physics, I typically give them answers anyway. They can copy their answers. It's not going to help them on an AP test. They have to be able to think about this stuff. And so I'm putting out answers along with problem sets so they can double check it. And I ask them, check these answers first, and then let's focus on the ones you can't get, not the ones that you got. If you got them, okay. And if you have questions, that way we can narrow down the discussion. But I think we're going to have to be doing that. We're going to have to put out solid enough explanation. So I have to generate parallel part because I can't do it in conversation with them. I would have them come into class. I just had folders with answers in them so they could work as a group to check their answers with each other and with the answer key. And then after that, I'd say, okay, now you've looked at these things. What do we need to take a look at? And that way it kind of narrowed the discussion. But we're going to have to do that with the parents, and it's going to have to be so that a non-physics person or a non-person can figure this stuff out and help them at all. And then, yeah, most of the parents are trying to, with the emails that I've sent, the parents are appreciative, thankful that I've made contact with them, and they're checking just to make sure that Johnny or Mary are in contact with me, trying to get that process going if they're not. But you're right. It's still going to leave some gaps. It's going to be tough to fill in and make sure we're getting everybody.
Mr. French, question I have that is a reflection question back from the time that we had to go to technology to the end of the year. Do you feel like the students maintained? There's a big question out there in the educational world. Are students retaining the information that was done over this period, or do you see some loss or gaps that could be established or created because of that lack of personal contact, being in school, those other issues besides the social and emotional issues? Have you had any reflection on that, or any of the kids shared anything with you?
I talked about having students coming in across the board with their capabilities because they're all at a different level when they walk in the door. And I think we're increasing that because some people are going to retain and do this better than others. I'll tell you, Franklin Township did a crazy thing. We based the semester then on their third 9 weeks, and this stuff wasn't necessarily required for them to do because they couldn't, and their fear was equity. And here we are, a one-to-one school, but they were worried about the special ed needs. How do you do time and a half? How can you provide a reader? All of those resources they could not provide, so they just locked it down. We're going to base it on what you've done. You can go back and show mastery on third 9-week material to increase your semester grade, but there was no impetus for the students. That's why I said I was physics students cranking it all out at the end, but the others started going, I had people going, why am I doing this stuff? And I said, because you need your math, you need your social studies and history, you need all of these things. The reason we go to school is to take this stuff away and have it so you can be prepared in the future and be able to be a productive citizen. And those people did continue, but they really had a stutter step on what is the requirement for me to do these things. And so I had a mixed blend of people participating, and I poked at them and asked them to do it, but I had no stick, as it were. And so when those students come in my door, I'm going to have to really go back and refab any of my math. My physics is a kind of a no holds barred. It's algebra and some trig, you know, some breaking vectors into components and that. And some have seen that, and always some have seen that and some haven't, but depending upon their math trail. So I always have to teach that anyway, but I'm expecting that there's going to be some lack in what they would have gotten this past run. And so I'm going to have to do a little pickup and make sure I'm doing some other support material along those lines too. Because yeah, I think that it's, and then the question is what sticks and what doesn't in this learning environment, because online is not face-to-face every day, and they still get so much from you when you are there and can answer those questions. And so we're gonna have to create ways to, again, increase the communication, which is the challenge in this world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Which
you
is
know,
ironic
as
in and of
know,
itself.
our club president, you know, gonna have to make that tough decision on when Warren is going to be opening up, either in face or online. I was speaking to somebody from the Mooresville School Corporation over the weekend, and they are going to be face-to-face opening up in August, but they're talking about splitting the bus rides in half because they're not going to fill the buses, so that's going to take longer. So just like Mr. French was saying, they're going to really encourage parents to bring the kids to school. They're going to have the lunches in the classrooms. And our guest from Germany, Claudia, she just mentioned in Germany, they are having school face to face, and they're requiring the children to wear a mask. We haven't even thought or talked about that. And she said that they've had 8,900 deaths for 80 million people. I just looked ours up. We're at 2,150 here in Indiana deaths. And here in the United States, we've had a little over 110,000 deaths, just so you know. But, you know, I haven't even thought about the mask thing. That would be very, you know, awkward and tough for a student in a learning environment as well. But thanks for sharing all that information. I've learned a lot just listening to you today. So
thank you. You know, mask issues that has come up, and I've noticed through church. We're doing our church services online, and we're singing and doing all of that. But we're talking about coming back and doing the face-to-face with a limited amount of people, you know, just not filling the whole place. Singing is an issue because you project a lot more from your lungs, and so there's a lot more chance of that. The masks are a 25% deal along with the other parts of it. But now, if you're there and you're videoing that and your pastor has a mask on, so many people actually watch lips when they're listening. And so when you put that mask over somebody's face, it becomes harder to understand, even if it doesn't block the sound. And so if you're recording some of your class lectures when you've got some people there and some people not there, if you've got a mask on, it's going to be a little bit trickier for them to understand what's going on as you do that. So even having a modified video plus face-to-face is going to have a few things that we have to kind of work through technically. One of the things I've encouraged my students to do as well as we do this is frame your day, because when you're staying at home, so much of your work gets mixed in with your play, and your mind doesn't know the difference between playing on the computer and working on the computer, and everything kind of gets mixed together. It's like you're working and as a teacher making those vids and doing the labs and then talking to them. There's on task and off, and I've encouraged them to separate their personal time and still have a piece of that from their work time. And I think that probably goes on for all of us in this crazy environment, is that you've got to do certain things, but, and now it's become very, analog in that you've got this meeting at 6:30 at night and that meeting, there's so many of these meetings and such. and just try and frame that up so that your mind and your body, and so you can stay healthy and do these things, is to separate out your work and have a schedule for that, and then the other, and try and make it as standardized as you can, because I think we lose a lot of them in that they just kind of wander all over the place too. And that's all of us in this day and age.
Ryan, this is Jeff. Just as a matter of interest, the Indy Northeast Club, not too far from you, meets at Hillcrest Country Club, and tomorrow they're meeting in person. So they are one of the first clubs to do so.
Tim and I had a conversation yesterday about the availability of our space. So as we have a chance to get all concerned persons in to make that decision, we'll have an announcement for everyone on the first of, what we hope is resuming face-to-face, but we also emphasize the importance of maintaining the digital component of it, because there's some members who won't be able to do it. There's some who won't want to, and that's okay. We have to be sensitive to everyone in how they feel about the best way to ease back into things.
Yeah, true.
Who's got the sirens?
That's me here in Greenwood.
Okay. Well, do we have any other questions or comments for Mr. French?
Hey, Ryan, I had two things I want to say. And first off, before I forget to say hello to Claudia, I just want to let her know that me and my family were in Wirtzburg for 3 years when I was on active military service. So when I saw you come up there, I wanted to say something to you, but I never got a word of edgewise. So I'm now taking that chance to do that. The other, so welcome again, and it was great that you were able to reach out to us from such a far way to join our meeting. Hey, Rick, I'm glad you talked a little bit more about the difficulty is going to be to get kids motivated to really participate in some of this here scheduling, because I'm going to tell you, as everybody knows, I work with a school district on the west side, and I had, along with a few other folks, had a collection of about 15, 16 kids who we were supplementing their motivation to do their assignments that were issued to them. We shut down everything in February, March, something like that there, and we shut that down until the end of the school year. And of course, we held all these kids online. And one of the challenges that I had, and we were leaving third quarter, going into the fourth quarter, so they had a whole full quarter to get their act together and to bring their grades up and that sort of thing. And it was disappointing, to tell you the truth, because those kids had the ones that I had, and I've talked with the other guys, and they were of the same mind, and that was that the kids that we've had were doing very well, passing their grades. Third quarter was looking good. First and second quarter was looking real good. When they got to the fourth quarter, man, I'm going to tell you, there were so many challenges we had in getting kids to really stay focused and do the things that we needed them to do. I mean, I'm calling kids on a regular basis, and I, a lot of them would not even answer the phone because they would either sleep. Kids don't get up until around noon, so I shut down any noon call, any early morning calls, because kids would just stand up at night and were just really playing. A lot of that was one of the things. They would just stand up all night, and they were staying up all night because they were playing video games. That I found out as I started researching why these kids weren't available to me. Well, they were still playing video games. They were partying. They were having a great time during this little break. And I talked with the parents. I mean, I had the parents on lockdown as well. I mean, I had texts to them, emails to them, and all of that. And some of them cooperated and worked real well with me. But most of my family members were working, and so they were putting it up to the kids to on their own, their own motivation to work during the day. Well, these kids weren't doing that. They were laying in bed all day. I had parents complaining to me about, Mr. Dorsey, I come home from work and none of the work's been done. They haven't done anything, and this sort of thing. I started calling later in the evening just to get kids motivated and moving forward. So we had some real problems. Again, video games, playing with their buddies, texting each other. Some were leaving the home and coming back when they were supposed to be shut down and stay in the home, that sort of thing. Kids were coordinating, having, get-togethers, if you will. I mean, it was just a disaster to take the truth. And so when we did the review on how they were doing in the fourth quarter, they went to it fell through the floor. I mean, all the guys that were making some progress through the year and doing real well, and then at the end of during this period of time, the scores were just ferocious. And so we talked about that, and we graduated the kids who we graduated, and now the challenge is, do we move these kids forward who didn't do as well at the end of the year as we should have? It was really a disaster. It was really disappointing, to tell you the truth. Parents having to work, some parents not being engaged, kids couldn't get their parents to help them because they couldn't do the work either, you know what I mean, that sort of thing. It was just not that good. So I'm glad you brought that up, because all along in this here meeting, we were kind of being very positive about what it looks like in the future and going forward. But if we have that kind of performance, and I'm not sure, and I'm not saying we were unique. I'm pretty much sure that over the state, that during this period of time, we had kids that just were not, engaged and cooperating. And now the challenge is really on the school district to figure out, who do you move forward, for one, and then how do we not have the problems we had during this here little, what I consider a test period, to see if that online programming, online schooling, the Zoom, all of that is going to be working. Because you mentioned a couple of things that I thought was pretty interesting. It is just a simple thing. How are you going to do buses? I mean, these buses have a capacity of, I don't know, what, 20 kids, 30 kids? You can't have 30 kids on a bus.
Usually 66 kids.
Okay, there you go. My wife was telling me, she gave me a number like that, but we were talking about this. So now what are you going to do? Have 2 buses per route? And once you fill up with 16 on one, that bus goes back to the school, and then your other bus takes over the rest of the route. I mean, how do you fix that? So I know that's a real challenge to Tim and a lot of superintendents and the school districts on how to get this thing fixed. And then, of course, you've got these kids that just don't have access to internet. How do you fix that?
There may be a time on the buses in that, a lot of that bus funding comes from the state within the equation for how you get your money. But it's almost like you have to have the need before you have the money, although they're pretty fluid right now with the problems we're facing. But, how do you fund running multiple buses through a neighborhood, and how do you do the logistics on some of that too? Even if the parents start bringing their children to school, you're going to have these incredible block-ups and everything. Every school is now going to have a whole new problem of drop-off and pickup that's already significant, but you're going to have, if you have a majority of parents dropping kids off, they don't have the infrastructure set up for the just dropping and picking up. All of that's going to be a time lag. I think the trade-off in a lot of this, and even in getting it to work, is extended time, because time is money, and to get everybody there at the same time, you could do things a little bit quicker. But I think you're going to find out that these curriculum are somehow going to have to, some material will have to give, or you'll have to stretch it out a little bit more just to make sure that you're making key points and doing that. And if you've got this flux going on, that's going to make it transitional. The other thing, Howard, you mentioned, and I think this is a great point, I think the corporations, the schools, are going to have to really push on communicating with parents how they can help to have that child involved. Because as a teacher, it's going to be a challenge for me to update who's behind and who's not on any given day. I mean, I do that as regularly as I can, but it can be challenging. So that's the only thing Franklin Township had us inserting in the fourth 9 weeks, since it didn't count, is we put the assignments in and we just said whether they completed them or not, so that they know who's incomplete, so that they could get on their case or do whatever. But I think you're going to have a better system, because a lot of the parents aren't tied in either. So they don't have the technology to do that.
Absolutely.
And so there's going to have to be a real push on how parents can help support their child to stay in the game and involved, because it is going to create a greater spread.
I think one of the things that we have to think about as well is informing the public. One of the things that I've noticed from several conversations that I've had over the summer is that there are kids who, or public rather, who have really no concept of the involvement that we as teachers have to have in making this happen. Like you said, I believe maybe Howard, you said it, that time is money. And I mean, you can't expect teachers, I mean, we're kind of uniquely situated because I've taught for 30 years. Clearly you've taught for 1 or 2, and I know Howard's taught, and you know, we have a limit. We have the ability to be flexible, I think, in a lot of ways, whereas some of the younger teachers don't know all of the components that go into being a teacher, and therefore the public doesn't know. So when we start putting a price tag on this, like those 3 buses that are going to be needed to pick up the same number of kids that one bus used to do, is going to be triple the cost, give or take, you know. And so that's the thing. I mean, you know, to what point are we going to be able to educate people in a reality situation so that they know what it's going to cost? That's the hardest part, at least for me. And, you know, a lot of parents, there are all kinds of memes all over the, you know, the internet saying that teachers ought to be paid $1 billion a year because, you know, parents had no idea what we do on a daily basis. And that's true. I think that I worked harder, even though I've taught for a long time, I think that I worked harder for this last 8 weeks or 9 weeks than I would in the course of an entire year.
Yeah, you know, you brought up about these younger new teachers coming on board. Man, they were going to come into a firestorm because it wasn't what they were expecting and what they taught when they were in school, and now they're faced with this. It's going to be a challenge, no question about it.
And is that going to eliminate even more people from going into the profession? I mean, you know, this is catastrophic, and I think that you know, we got to stay positive 100%. I totally agree with you, because we're the ones that are setting the tone, but we also have to be realistic. I'm not a doomsayer or a naysayer, but I'm just thinking, you know, does the public understand, you know, what yokes it's put on the shoulders of teachers so that we're teaching algebra, science, math, English, and then let's look at some of the practical things that we still need to teach that, you know, may or may not be being done.
One of the things that really helped me, and I don't know where all teachers are on this along those points, is that teaching the physics and the physics, I tend to push forward. I mean, I really front load this thing. So when this hit, I had covered all the material that would have been on the AP test. The AP test was offered online, and they cut down the material that they were going to cover because there were still some schools that had not covered like 3 units. It's like, oh my God. You know,
my daughter was in that situation at LC where she was taking a chemistry AP exam, and she said like 80% of the class failed the AP exam because the material was not covered. And I don't fault the teacher for that, because no one could foresee this happening. But still, you know, it's a paradigm shift, and that's, you know, for some people is pretty flexible and easy to do. For others, it is not.
I always push it, and so I'm teaching things deep. I'm trying to get them the best they can get. You know, this is, like, I call it physics no holds barred. And as we do that, I have room within my curriculum, not that I want to go that direction, where I could back off just a little bit. If time and issues are there, I focused on the labs because I wanted them to be doing the lab work during this time. And I focused on the key issues. One of these things we were covering, covering nuclear radiation, and we were looking at exponential growth and decay. And it's like, hey, if you don't know when you need to know about exponential growth and decay, look at COVID. I mean, we have 2 different time constants.
We were doing the same thing in Tech Theater 1, exponential growth and decay.
So it's like, you know, this is pertinent stuff right now to understand what's going on and why there's a tail that draws out for such a long time, because that's a different time curve on the decay and waiting for things to be so that we don't have that susceptibility. And so it's highly pertinent. So I'm definitely going to hit those things because it's practical at the time. And we still need technical people who are going to be doing these jobs, and now even more creative in new ways and new worlds. I keep trying to get my people to realize the phrase new norm, you know, that you can't, it's not just going to go back to what it was, and everybody wants it to be what it was. Well, that's a different world. We're post-COVID now. For for a year, 18 months, definitely we're going to be doing ideally different things so that we've shut this thing down. But then we're going to have other opportunities to practice good health conditions and that sort of thing, because they call it 100-year deal, but I don't think it's a 100-year deal. There'll be
The question now I have, maybe Claudia can help us with this. Since the schools are already open in Germany, can you tell us a little bit about the experiences related to all these problems we are going to be dealing with here?
Well, the point is not everybody goes to school. They have small groups. So one group has, let's say, one day or 1 week, that's one group. And on the other day or other week, it's another group, small groups, because of the social distancing, which is necessary. And everybody has to wear a mask. Everybody has to wash hands. All these measures have to be taken. But otherwise, it works very well. We don't have any problems. We don't have any COVID cases. So it works very well at the moment.
Things that I anticipate being a challenge, because I'm a physics teacher, is that different subjects and different courses can do that differently. If I have papers to be written, I'm English, and I have a book to be read and those sorts of things, I can frame that up and use that time on their timeline. But physics, and I always joke about block 4, block 8. I don't know if you know about block scheduling, but block 4 would be to take 4 classes every day, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and finish up the semester in 9 weeks. And block 8 is where you take 1, 2, 3, 4 one day, 5, 6, 7, 8 the next day, and you toggle. So you still take a semester to get every course done, but you only see people every other day. I always joke about, we could do physics, and some of the workshops I go to, we crunch through the whole semester in a 2-week, graduate type course, but you're doing physics in 2 weeks. I call that block 1. And that's kind of what we're doing, is if I see them on Monday and I don't see them again till the next Monday, that's an awful lot of technology on their load rather than seeing me on a regular basis. So educationally, it would be better to see somebody for half an hour every day of the year, because then you're just getting a little bit, forcing it. But we're going to be into some funky block thing, and that's why we're going to have to really focus on key issues, because you're right, we're going to have
another thing that we have to consider is that we have to get out of the box, because the school day itself has to be formatted differently. And some things that we have done before may not necessarily need to continue. And some things that we haven't done, we should. An example of that would be, not only are we accelerating learning, as you're just talking about, Mr. French, but we also, I believe, may have to have a time in the day where we're remediating. We're going back and connecting with past gaps in reading or math or physics or whatever, history, whatever it might be, to get them moving forward before they get so far behind they'll never get caught up. And that's another factor. But I think we have to really look at maybe starting one school at one time, and not everybody else at that time. Get all the buses there and pick everybody up. Then the next time, maybe it's 40 minutes later, we do another school, and all the buses in the district go and pick up that route. And they're going as a unit, a wagon train, to pick up the students to that time and point of pickup. And pickup and dismissal would be totally different depending on the need of the elementary or middle school or high school. It's going to have to be different to be functional, but we have to put in a remediation component in the day, or we're going to lose more than we keep. And that's a concern.
There's a second half of that story, because I've done this before. I was the principal of an alternative school from 2004 to 2008. And we had students on a modified schedule. We brought them in earlier in the day. If they were seniors and such, the 5th-year seniors, trying to finish them off, we brought them in, had them in there for a period and a half. We went to block scheduling. And when my teachers wanted to do that, I said, you're going to have to extend the time that it takes for a student to show proficiency, because you've got students at risk already, and now you're trying to cram it down like this. That's not going to work, because these kids don't even work well in a regular 50-minute Carnegie unit. And the other place that you can play with that is how long they have to show proficiency. You change the timeline on when they, you know, it's like, I always had my students turning stuff in. It's like your real bottom line is the end of the semester, because after the semester's over, it's too late. Or the AP test, you know, after the AP test, you're not going to demonstrate proficiency on an AP test. But I was pretty flexible about taking things. You're going to have to really be flexible about, okay, now you lose. Now you have to start this thing over again, even though you've got pieces of the puzzle. So you're going to have a flexible, and that becomes a real logistic, well, an interesting piece in showing that proficiency. But I think
this all harkens back to a concept we had probably 20 years ago called outcome-based education, which becomes so much more individualized instruction, where you go from, you know, hey, here's this concept that I want you to master that the state tells us that we have to master. You have X amount of days, or, you know, right now you have X amount of days to master it. Well, if Sam doesn't master it in X amount of days, does that mean that he's incapable of mastering it, or do we just need to extend the deadline? And so that's, you know, that's a huge shift from tradition. And if I recall right, OBE didn't work real well, because it was just so hard to manage. You know, when, like, I have, you know, and I only taught 2 classes. I was, you know, I'm the director of the Performing Arts Center. But I would still have 80 kids, and, you know, they weren't, you know, that sounds worse than it is, but, you know, when I was an English teacher, I mean, I'd have close to 210 kids a day. And if I'm doing OBE, boy, that's, you know, keeping a lot of balls in the air when you're juggling that. But true, I mean, you know, it's an entire shift in philosophy and concept, I think.
The other
and is this something that we can do in 3 months? I mean, are we going to be able to figure this out before August?
I don't even know when I'm starting.
Yeah, I know, right? Exactly.
I'll throw one more thing in there for you. You have to think about our teachers too, because we have teachers who are immunocompromised, and they can't be in a classroom with that number of kids. So, you know, what are you going to do there? You're going to have parents that are going to say they're not bringing their kids back. So, do you have those teachers do the virtual part of it, or what? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Very good point. Very good point there.
Well, with that, everyone, we have gone over the 1 o'clock deadline. So, Mr. French, I'd like to thank you for coming to speak to our club today. And I'd like to thank our visiting Rotarians and Catherine for visiting with us today. And as we close out all of our meetings, we have the 4-way test. So we'll put that up on the screen, and we can close the meeting today with our 4-way test. So, number 1, is it the truth?
Truth.
Number 2, is it fair to all concerned? Number 3, will it build goodwill and
better friendship?
And number 4, will it be
beneficial
to all concerned? So thank you everyone for attending today. Next week's meeting, we have David Thompson, who will be speaking. He is the newest member of our club, followed by the week after that, June 23rd, where we have a DAC-DB demonstration for everyone. So please have a safe, happy, and productive week, and be careful this afternoon. There are thunderstorms in the forecast here, so stay safe and make sure you're connecting with friends and family to check in on everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Ryan.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great week, everyone.